You don't order. Good evening, everybody. Well, at 11:30 tomorrow, in full pomp and circumstance, the Queen will arrive in her beautiful gold carriage at the Sovereign's entrance, and the state opening of Parliament will begin. It is an extraordinary affair, something that the rest of the world looks onto, I think, with jealousy, because actually, when it comes to this stuff, we do it, I think, better than anybody else. There won't be one next year. This state opening is for a period of 2 years. The government say that's because we need to get through the whole Brexit period. So it is, to all intents and purposes, post a general election, a very important day where the Queen will read out the government's agenda for the next 2 years. Brexit, of course, being absolutely front and centre of all of it. And yet, I cannot think, in all the years that I've been following UK politics, of a time when the Queen's speech was delivered when the role of the Prime Minister was in such doubt. Now, today, Chris Grayling, who was a prominent Brexiteer, who was the Transport Secretary, and indeed was Theresa May's campaign manager when she ran for the leadership of the party, so, OK, that may prejudice slightly his view, but he says that a change of Prime Minister was not on the agenda. And yet, as he's doing that, the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, was down in the City of London at Mansion House, basically blowing apart the Prime Minister's idea that we would end the free movement of people. Boris has said that he supports the Prime Minister, which, of course, in many ways is taken to be a leadership bid. But I'm really curious, given how the general election went, given the public reaction to Theresa May's response when she went and visited the Grenfell Tower and didn't initially meet any of the people who'd suffered as a result of it, given that the deal with the DUP apparently has not yet been put together and she will go in, as it stands, leading a minority government into this Queen's speech, although I have to say, I suspect there's a fair bit of play acting going on here on behalf of the DUP, and good for them, they're in a powerful position. But given all of these things, is it really right that Theresa May stays as our Prime Minister? So I'm asking you this question. As I say, there is no point in the last 40 years at which on the eve of a Queen's speech this question would even have been a consideration. But do you think it's right that she stays on as Prime Minister, or does this country, in these troubled times, need a new Prime Minister? And if you think that, frankly, Theresa should be shown the door, then call me on 0345 6060 973. You may think it's the last thing we need, because what would happen if she went? There'd be cries about lack of legitimacy and the need for another general election. And if you feel that way, then, of course, tweet me on @LBC using the hashtag Farage and LBC. You can text me whatever you like. And if they're clean enough, I'll read them out. And for that, it's 84850. And as ever, you can watch me on Facebook Live by going to lbc.co.uk. John in Formby in Lancashire, do we have the right Prime Minister going into the Queen's speech tomorrow?
No, she's damaged goods. She's got to go. It's often said, and I was listening to some Roman history on an audio tape the other night.
Right.
I think it was Galba, whenever there were 4 emperors in 1 year. And there was a wonderful quote from Suetonius. Had he not become emperor, no one would ever have doubted his ability to do it. Well, we've had this with Gordon Brown, and we've had this with Theresa May. And I think she's been very unlucky in some ways, but there's a fair measure of stupidity that goes into it as well. I think she's been unmasked, and if I could go to Shakespeare, I forget the play, but...
Oh, come on, John, I'm relying on you.
Well, the quote, I don't think it really matters. If it were done, 'twere better it were done quickly.
Yes.
You've got to give the new guy or gal time to get in, get their feet under the table, and take over. It's rather like a football club where they say, with every confidence in the manager. And
yes, we
all know what happened.
I have to say, that was my feeling about Boris being very supportive. But, John, we've only got 20 months left now on the Article 50 process. Is it really time to change leader now?
Well, it's better than 17.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that on grounds of pure logic. And John, you think she's damaged goods. I have to say, I'm struggling to fight back against you. I think she's damaged goods. I think she was found out in the general election campaign. Who do you think would be right to succeed her?
I haven't a clue. I think Boris Johnson will win the public over. Because the trouble is, I think you're an exception to this, if I could sing your praises a bit, but as a friend of mine said to me, well, we don't have politicians nowadays, we've got game show hosts.
Right. What does that mean?
Well, I think it's all about image and spin. I had an ex-girlfriend who confessed to me many years ago in the 1980s, I voted for David Owen. I said, why did you do that? And she said, he was the best looking.
Yeah. And people with beards don't get elected. And no. John, I'm going to thank you for a wide-ranging call that took us back to the classics and through Shakespeare and on to modern times. And keep calling the programme. Thank you. On Facebook, Caroline says, Hammond is the only man with a few brain cells, unlike the other numpties. You may be right, Caroline, but he also would, I think, reverse virtually all of the referendum result. Craig says there is no way Theresa May will leave. It's too embarrassing for her. And, as she said, she can be a really bloody difficult woman. She isn't going to go anytime soon. I wasn't suggesting, Craig, it'll be her choice. In the Tory party, it's known as the men in grey suits, who sort of descend on the Prime Minister or a Cabinet Minister and say, now listen, old boy or old girl, the time has come really to go. That generally is how the Tory party have done business over the years. Edward, in St Albans, is Mrs May looking rock solid going in to the Queen's speech tomorrow?
Hi, Nigel. Thanks for letting me on your show again. I don't think she's solid at all, but I think she's a lot better than the alternative. What I think is that politics is basically like listening to a new Young Thug song or just a new song in general. You know, the first time you hear it, you like it. Second time, you like it. But by the fourth or fifth play, you're just not liking it as much. People are sick of politics, having elections every other month.
Yes.
People simply want a leader who's going to do stuff for them, who's going to represent them. I mean, when I go to a restaurant, I want one waiter to pay my meal. If like another waiter just pops out and another waiter, I'm not sure who I'm working with. Imagine being in the EU and suddenly a new Prime Minister suddenly pops out and we're not sure what he thinks. Hi, I'm British PM for a week. Here's your order. It wouldn't work.
But actually, Edward, we saw yesterday, did we not, that David Davis, his job is to negotiate the Brexit deal. So presumably, whoever became Prime Minister if Theresa May went, that would not affect the Davis relationship, if you want to call it that, with Mr Barnier that was started yesterday.
Well, I disagree because, you know, what David Davis isn't the front of our country. David Davis is just, you know, our representative in those negotiations. When people in France and when the representatives of France look at England, they don't see David Davis, they see Theresa May. And that's what we need to focus on, is that image, is that strong image, which I'll admit, you know, she's lost by calling this election, but fundamentally, she won the election.
So would it be
the democratic mandate?
Might it be more logical then, Edward, given that David Davis is going to be the face of Brexit in Brussels, might it be more logical if he was the Prime Minister too?
Well, I mean, I can understand that role, but obviously Theresa May, when she came into power, the reason why she created a department for Brexit is because she thought, you know, she couldn't do it herself. There's so many roles and so many different applications of what a Prime Minister has to do. She felt that she'd make a whole new department with a whole new civil service that could effectively deal with it. So I think that if you're going to add that on to the many other jobs that Theresa May has now, you know, that would just make it ineffective.
All right. And so, Edward, your basic feeling is that she's a pretty good leader and we should stay with her.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but I think that's the only option we have.
Fine. No, you're perhaps you are the pragmatist, and perhaps in reality that is what most Tory MPs want. As I say, their big fear, and Edward, thank you for the call, the big fear, and I was talking this morning to a fairly prominent Tory member of the House of Lords, and he's terrified. He says, look, you know, if she goes, everybody will be screaming that the new leader hasn't got legitimacy, that it's time for another election, and anyway, their majority in the Commons is pretty slim. I'm not sure I buy that, but it may well be correct. Anne says to me on text, I've often wondered how different things would have been had David Davis won the Tory leadership rather than David Cameron. I think we need Davis now more than ever. David Davis is what, 67, 68? In recent times, we'd have considered that quite old. But Vince Cable has thrown his hat into the ring to be the next Lib Dem leader at 74. So perhaps that doesn't matter at all. Judy in Brentwood, is Theresa May the right person to stay on as Prime Minister, especially through the next 20 months and the Brexit process?
Well, first of all, Nigel, I think that woman you were talking to today on the television, she needs to listen to you, and she might have a different opinion. But anyway,
yeah. For those that don't know, I was on with a well-known radio critic, quite a famous radio critic, and she sort of said that I wasn't prepared to listen to the other point of view, and I ignored people and cut them off, which simply can't be right, Judy, can it?
Totally incorrect. However, here we are. I've been 52 years a Conservative, except when I became a UKIPper.
Yeah.
And Philip Hammond, this morning, he just made my blood boil. I thought you were a complete numpty. We don't need you.
This word numpty is featuring a bit tonight. I mean, and again, for those that don't know, Philip Hammond spoke this morning with the Governor of the Bank of England in Mansion House in the City, and basically, Judy, he said we should forget, shouldn't we, about getting rid of open-door immigration.
Absolutely useless.
Right, so we've written him off, Judy, and that's fine. What about the Prime Minister? Is she any good?
Oh, she's a cardboard cutout.
Right, so...
And she's got somebody behind her. It reminds me of those, what are those puppets called? They come, I can't remember. We used to watch them, Sesame Street or something.
or the Muppet Show, or it could be anything.
She's a Muppet. Somebody behind her. In her mouth.
Now, Judy, as you, in very polite terms, have written off most of the people elected to Westminster in the last general election, who do you think should take over as Prime Minister?
Well, we have to have you. But if you're not going to do it and we can't get you in, then we've got to have Boris.
Got to have Boris. Judy, I thank you. Judy there, batting for Boris. The rest are absolutely useless. They're Muppets, according to Judy. Right now, you're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively. It's the Queen's speech tomorrow, full pomp and circumstance, and the Queen will read out the government's agenda, but the question that is being asked is, would Theresa May really be the right person to lead us through the course of the next 2 years, or would it be better to get this government set up, get the Queen's speech voted through, and then perhaps to change leaders? And I did say earlier that David Davis was 68, and that some might think that too old. And Andrew Pearce, who, of course, is on LBC every Friday evening, he tweets, allies of Boris Johnson say that David Davis at 68 is too old to lead the Tories. But Pearce points out he's the same age as Jeremy Corbyn and 23 years younger than the Queen. Well, I have to say, I don't think 68 is too old, and particularly given the importance of what we face over the course of the next couple of years. I'm very keen to hear from the May Should Stay crowd. At the moment, most of you are texting, tweeting, Facebooking and ringing, saying they don't, you really don't think she's up to it. But please, Theresa May supporters, do let me know. Ben says to me on text, he says, Nigel, if she believes in democracy, she must observe the wishes of the electorate at the election. They don't believe she is a leader, which she has proved through her recent actions. She is not. Well, Ben, it's all right to say that, but you know what? She did still win 60 seats more than the Labour Party. Ollie says, I'm not gaining any confidence from Mrs May's leadership. We need a strong leader that can close out these important deals. Maybe the PM needs support from business leaders, like the Trump administration. Well, now there's a thought. Donald, of course, who was supposed to be coming on a state trip in October, and now we're told that may well have been delayed. Graham in Leeds, tell me, are you a Theresa May supporter? Is she the right person to stay on over the course of the next few years?
Good evening, Sir Nigel.
Good evening.
Right, just start to say one thing at the start. Churchill was 69, I think, when he took over.
60. In fact, he was 65. He just, he was over the old age pension age. He was 65, and then
was he really?
Yeah, and then in his second stint as Prime Minister, I think he was 81 when he finally stood down.
Well, there you go. Yeah, I don't think he's too old. Now then.
What, David Davis, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah,
no,
sure.
But I haven't rung up to talk about David Davis.
Right, come on. Come on, you're on LBC, Graham. Say what you think.
The point is this. Theresa May is not fit, as far as I'm concerned, to be Prime Minister. And I'll tell you why.
Mm-hmm.
Former Northern Ireland secretaries, both Tory and Labour, Tony Blair has said that doing any kind of DUP can threaten the Good Friday Agreement. But more to the point, John Major, who stays out of internal Tory politics, has turned around and said exactly the same. You can't play politics with a Good Friday Agreement. There are too many people died to get that agreement, but to find us where we are.
But, Graham, if the DUP were not in a full coalition, would that still threaten the Good Friday Agreement?
Well, these people who know the Good Friday Agreement inside out over years, some of them actually wrote it, such as John Major and Tony Blair.
Yeah.
They say yes. And I'm going to go along with that.
All right, so are you suggesting then, Graham, that a coalition or a confidence and supply, as they call it, deal with the DUP is actually inappropriate?
Absolutely inappropriate. It's up to the British government to remain as good, honest brokers, to be even-handed between all sides in the Northern Ireland situation.
So if I accept that premise, Graham, what should Theresa May do? Should she simply run a minority government?
Well, there are all sorts of options. As she explored fully the opportunities with the Scottish National, Plaid Cymru.
But Graham, these people on Brexit take completely the opposite position. It's impossible, surely.
Well, they can do all sorts of things, Nigel. What I'm saying is this. You can't play with people's lives.
Okay.
You cannot play with the Good Friday Agreement.
Graham, you make the point very well and very strongly. Thank you, Graham, making the point that Blair and Major say the deal with the DUP is unworkable because it would unravel the Good Friday Agreement. I have to say, I'm a little sceptical about that, particularly if it's not going to be a full coalition. Beth says to me on Twitter, get off May's back, she won. Beth, I made that point a few moments ago. She did win, but it's not perceived, particularly by many, that she won. I also get by text, Nigel, I think the Tories need a new leader, but as a lifelong supporter, if they put Boris forward, I will never vote for them again. Well, Boris does, of course, divide opinion. Anthony in Staines, do you think May is fit to be our Prime Minister for the next couple of years, or should the Tories change horse?
She should definitely stay, because if she goes, it'll not only destroy the Conservative Party, it'll also be a great victory for our enemies abroad.
Why?
Because don't forget that she brokered that great deal with Donald Trump when she went over there and got him to support NATO. And I think America will be very shocked if she goes. Well,
I think that America or the Trump administration would be supportive of Theresa May or her successor, provided they were interested in the same things that we are. I do think that the arguments we've made on NATO are very, very important. Equally, I think the offer they've made to us of having a trade deal is pretty important too. So I get the American perspective, but why would it be, Anthony, a disaster for the Tory party if she was to be replaced by Davis or Boris or somebody else?
Because look what happens when they stabbed Thatcher in the back. They didn't recover for nearly 20 years. I mean, to do that would be just calamitous for them, because Theresa May, let's face it, was doing very well up to that manifesto.
So what, Anthony, if she resigned of her own volition and wasn't seen to have been stabbed in the back, would that then be disastrous for the Tory party?
I think so, because Boris is very good at being Boris, but being a Prime Minister is another thing. And when he was Mayor of London, he didn't really run anything except large debts, Garden Bridge, things like this.
Yeah.
And I think that's all Boris will do. It's all the Boris show. And with Theresa May, the mistake she made, obviously, was with that dreadful manifesto. She got rid of that person that, thingy that wrote it for her. And I think that the country will stand by her.
In fact, actually, it was Ben Gummer that wrote it, and he then lost his seat in Ipswich at the election. So, Anthony, you think that the country is strong and stable with Theresa May as Prime Minister?
Definitely, otherwise it's momentum in charge.
Right, very good. Thank you very much indeed. John in Henley-on-Thames, we've just heard there a very strong support for Mrs May, the argument being that apart from the manifesto, she's doing really well and that the country's right behind her. Is that your view?
Good evening, Nigel. No,
Good
I'm
evening.
afraid it's not. I think Theresa May has made too many mistakes over the last few months with all the terrorist attacks. Quite honestly, she's come across as a cold, wet fish. She also cannot control Philip Hammond.
No, well, that's certainly true.
Yeah, and I think it's very worrying for the Conservative Party if they want to stay in control.
Well, well, provided they get some sort of agreement with the DUP, they just about can be in control. But it's a little tenuous, isn't it?
It certainly is, yes. I mean, until yesterday, I would have backed David Davis as a new leader.
Yeah. So what put you off him?
His concessions to the EU on the first day of EU talks.
Okay, well...
I think he went soft.
Do you?
Yeah, I do. I really do. They won the day. I think, if anyone knows this, David Davis, with his background, should know that when you go into battle, you go in with all guns blazing. But he didn't.
So, John, let's just get this straight. Hammond is traitorous. May's useless. Davis has gone soft. Who do you think should be the Prime Minister?
Well, I'm not quite sure. But I think Boris Johnson may deserve a chance.
OK. John from Henleys thinks Boris may deserve a chance. Derek on Facebook says, not Boris. Boris's clownish antics are nothing but a facade to fool people that he's harmless. He's not. He's a nasty piece of work. You know, I've thought lots of things about Boris over the years, but never that he was a nasty piece of work. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show. At 11:30 tomorrow, it will be the state opening of Parliament as the Queen's golden carriage arrives at the sovereign entrance to the Palace of Westminster. And believe you me, hundreds of millions of people from across the world will look on and say, wow, don't the Brits do this stuff well? And I can never remember in my lifetime ever going into a Queen's speech with the Prime Minister's legitimacy being in such doubt. Now, the reports we've had today are that the deal with the DUP is simply not happening. And with me to discuss this is LBC's political editor, Theo Usherwood. Theo, are there really problems with this DUP deal, or is it last-minute gamesmanship with the Northern Irish to get more money?
You're quite right. There is a degree of brinksmanship with this. The problem for Theresa May is that, again, she set the bar so high. She went to the palace at 12:30 on June the 9th and she said that she could form a government and that she would do it with the help of the DUP. Now, some might say that she jumped the gun too early, that she should have waited, that she could have got it through as her Queen's speech as a minority Conservative government and then called the bluff of the DUP and said, are you really going to vote with Jeremy Corbyn? Are you really going to support this Labour leader and, in effect, cast the Conservatives into opposition?
And of course, the DUP, for listeners, the DUP, who are, a staunch unionist, predominantly very heavily Protestant party, they can't stand Corbyn because of his personal relationships with Gerry Adams over the course of many years.
Exactly. You filled in the blanks there for me, Nigel. And that is to the point. They are never going to support Jeremy Corbyn. Yeah. They are never going to allow Jeremy Corbyn to become Prime Minister if they can help it. Now, there are three areas which go into this negotiation between Theresa May and the DUP. Firstly, the social conservative stuff, the LGBT, the abortion, time limits, that sort of stuff.
But that is... isn't that all devolved anyway?
That is devolved. But what the Tory MPs, and the reason I raise it is that Tory MPs do not want to see any concessions. They don't want to see any creep across into votes in Westminster on those issues. And so there's pushback that Theresa May knows that she can't concede any ground on this stuff, whether it's material or otherwise to her own backbenchers, because they'll go for her. Then you've got the Northern Ireland peace process stuff, and we've seen the meetings and what Gerry Adams had to say on that, and she's bound to a significant extent that she can't give anything away. She can't be seen to side with the DUP. We've seen the statements to come out of Number 10 Downing Street, which has been along the lines of, we will do a deal with the DUP as it relates to their position in Westminster, but we will remain the arbiters in the Northern Ireland peace process to make sure that the Good Friday Agreement stays, it remains in place. So she doesn't have much wriggle room there. So then you're left with money. Pork barrel politics, your airports, your runways, your motorways, your bus stations, and that's where the haggling really is taking place. Now, there are many Conservatives, Nigel, who are saying to Theresa May, just forget it. Just go it alone, and then dare the DUP to try and vote you down, because they'd never do it. But of course, as I say, the reason she looks weak is because she set the bar so high from the outset.
Did she take them for granted? Is that the reality of her visit to the Queen, saying she could form a government with the DUP?
Well, she needed to get into the Buckingham Palace before Jeremy Corbyn did. That was ultimately what she needed to do, and I said it on the morning, where you have a hung parliament, and there is... If she doesn't fill that void by getting to the palace to say she can form a government, she loses that first opportunity. And she didn't want to give Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell a sniff of power. And that's why she moved so quickly to shut that door and make sure that she at least bought herself some time to try and form that deal and put forward that Queen's speech.
OK, I get that. And Theo, finally, we've heard a lot over the last few weeks. I mean, John McDonnell talking about putting 1 million people on the streets to bring down the government, sort of language that I've talked about on this show and that I have to say I find pretty alarming. And we're hearing today that tomorrow in Westminster, someone somewhere is planning what's called a day of rage. What can you tell us?
Yes, this day of rage, it is a controversial term, and of course there are accusations from the Tories that this has all been whipped up by figures within, senior figures within the Labour Party to cause, maximum disruption. We should also remember, Nigel, that our emergency services have withstood the most substantial pressure. Our police services, our fire services, our NHS, unbelievable pressure to help and support the victims and to bring those to account for the terrorist atrocities, and then to get a handle on what happened at Grenfell, the terrible events last week. And now they're going to be put under more pressure, keeping a bunch of, some might say, youths covered with their face covered who want to go around smashing the place up.
What I can't quite work out is who is behind this day of rage.
Well, that's a good question. And of course, there are accusations. We will see groups like the Socialist Workers' Party, and where there have been these protests before, the Tories have been very quick to point out the sorts of placards that are being waved around and held above the heads of various people. John McDonnell, for his part, and I should say this, Nigel, has been very clear on the social media, on the Twitter, saying that all protests must remain peaceful. And it's worth saying that I think, and I mean this in the broader sense, that if it turns ugly tomorrow, and there's no, there is perhaps a suggestion that it could turn ugly and it could turn violent, then that will be seen to undermine. It could be seen to undermine Jeremy Corbyn's cause, and it could also be seen to undermine those who have vented much fury and anger, rightly so, at the way the victims of the Grenfell fire have been treated.
Well, one thing for certain over the last few weeks in British politics is fortunes can wax and wane very, very quickly indeed. Theo Usherwood, thank you, and report back tomorrow on how this Queen's speech goes and how Theresa May looks this time tomorrow. As I say, again, I can't remember at any time in my life studying this, going into a Queen's speech with a feeling that a lot of questions were being asked about whether the Prime Minister had genuine legitimacy. Barbara, in Edinburgh, how do you feel? I mean, are you part of the May Mistake campaign?
Not really, but I think it's timing, isn't it? It's all to do with timing.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't like to say anything very bad about her, because I think at heart she's a good person.
Yep.
But I just think she's been a bit hapless, a bit naive, a bit aloof, various things.
So hang on. So Barbara from Edinburgh says Theresa May's a wonderful woman. She's just hapless, naive and aloof. So she might be jolly nice, but is she fit to be Prime Minister?
Yeah, no, David Davis.
David Davis, he's the man, is he?
Timing's all important because of Brexit.
Right, but David Davis is 68. That doesn't worry you.
67, and believe me, I could be Prime Minister.
Fine. So when should this happen, Barbara? Should it happen sooner rather than later?
Well,
how should they manage this?
I think we have to wait and see just a little bit how Brexit's going. And if Theresa May could kind of run the country while he's doing this, and be more like a sort of...
Well, actually, Barbara,
and just,
maybe in reality that's the position now, because I think that whatever Mrs May's political project was seen to be has come to an end. Davis is getting on with the negotiations. I thought he looked quite statesmanlike last night. One or two callers and tweeters think he looks a little bit weak. But Barbara, there's one other. I mean, you're clearly a David Davis fan. But Nicholas on text says to me, "Hi Nigel, yes, she should go and be replaced by Jacob Rees-Mogg." Give me your reaction to that, Barbara.
Well, I like Jacob Rees-Mogg, but no.
Right.
So sorry to say it, but he's from the wrong background. I mean, I've no issue with backgrounds really, but I think sometimes certain backgrounds are better to run a country of diversity.
Well, yes, but I think perhaps more important than where you come from is where you're going to. But I take the point. Barbara, thank you very much indeed for your call. And interesting, the Jacob Rees-Mogg support there that we see from Nicholas. And I get here, Lynn in Coventry says, Nigel, Jacob Rees-Mogg or John Redwood would both make great prime ministers. Like you, they both care about the UK. Theresa May, I believe, never really wanted to be prime minister. Well, who knows? She became Prime Minister either way. James in Claygate in Surrey. Is Theresa May the right person, as we go into this Queen's speech, to be our Prime Minister for the next few years?
Yeah, probably, I would say. But I've got a caveat with that, and I've also got a prediction for you.
Oh.
I think she's proven herself to be, I suppose, if not incompetent, certainly out of her depth. I think you kind of, from my opinion anyway, you can see she looks like she's drowning a little bit. She's in over her head. She may well have been a really good sort of Home Secretary, but I don't know whether she can necessarily handle all the pressures and all the caveats that come with being the PM. So my prediction is she will stay, and she will certainly stay tomorrow. And she will stay long enough that the powers that be at the Conservative Party can attach all of this negativity and everything that's happened over the last few weeks to her directly. And then they'll snap it off and she'll need to go at the right time and take all of that with her. And the Conservative Party will seem like they've had a fresh break, if that makes sense. Yep. A clean break, and they'll start afresh. That's kind of what I think, will happen. It's infuriating to watch, really. You kind of seeing her struggling so much.
So we get through the Queen's speech. We have the vote on the Queen's speech. We head towards the summer recess, and she then announces that she's standing down. Is that how you see it playing?
She won't go until there's no danger of their calling a second election because of her leaving. Because I said before the election, I think this is probably the best outcome for Jeremy Corbyn, because if there's an election now or any time in the next 6 months, he'll win it. And they managed to sort of grab a load of votes doing what Clegg did in 2015, 2010 rather,
2010,
and promised lots of stuff that maybe they didn't think they could deliver, but didn't have any worry of having to deliver it. So now what it seems is he's got this kind of golden horizon, and we're stuck with these nasty Tories, which is the way it's been
He's
played.
got the big M going with him. But James, you talk about Nick Clegg and the Liberal Democrats back in 2010. One thing for certain, British politics is highly volatile. Thank you. Right now, you're listening to the Nigel Farage Show. Some of you think May must stay. Others think, frankly, she's been found out. She's not up to the job, and the sooner it is done, the better, and they get somebody else. Paul says, May is damaged goods. No need to worry. Just let Brexit fail, which it will. She'll resign, and after that, Johnson 4P. The worry, of course, the worry people have is there could be another general election if there is this instability. Nigel, not another election. No one would bother to turn out to vote and Corbyn would win. So there's a lot of opinion on this. And Jan says, May cannot go just yet. The country is so much in need of stability at the moment, and the stupid march tomorrow won't help at all. I'm not sure this march tomorrow is stupid. I think this march tomorrow is dangerous. I don't like a lot of the things that have been said by those on the hard left over the course of the last few weeks. This idea, and for John McDonnell, fine, he may well have disassociated himself from whatever happens tomorrow in Parliament Square, but for him, just over a week ago, to be calling for 1 million people to be on the streets to bring down the government, hey, the whole point of having a democracy is you don't need to take to the streets. You don't need to move perhaps towards something that is intimidatory or even violent. And whatever happens tomorrow, I really hope that these people who want their day of rage, I hope they behave themselves, because the eyes of the world will be on our country tomorrow. Paul in Camberley, do you think Theresa needs to stay on for the stability of our nation, or is it time she went?
Hi, Nigel. How's it going? Cheers for having me on.
Thank you. No problem.
So, just to give a bit of a different perspective, I think, first of all, I think she will stay on.
Yep.
And she will get a deal with the DUP. As you say, they're probably just throwing their weight around a little bit at the last minute.
Well, actually, Paul, to be honest, they're probably enjoying themselves enormously, aren't they?
Yeah, they're probably loving it up, yeah. Of course they are. But so I think they'll stay on. I think, but what the Tories need to understand is, from a young person's perspective, throughout this campaign and throughout the last couple of terror attacks in the last few months, the thing that's damaging her is her impersonal and subdued approach to it all. You know, she's had no charisma, and it doesn't matter what it doesn't matter what political spectrum you come from. Like, personally, I'm a Labour supporter, but I appreciate across the spectrum, like, even from yourself, the charisma and almost the balls of actually going out and talking to the public and showing face.
Well, isn't
it? She just seems so subdued to it.
Isn't it actually, Paul? I mean, you know, charisma is somewhat tough to define, but isn't it about warmth? Isn't it a lack of warmth, perhaps towards other people that we saw at Grenfell Tower when she visited there?
Yeah. Exactly, and she definitely doesn't have that personal attachment at all. So, but I can't think of anyone, Tory frontbenchers, anyone that comes to mind that can come in. So I think she will stay.
Yep.
And she'll get a deal with the DUP. But I mean, like I told you, from my perspective, what she's damaged from a young people's point of view. But I also think going with the DUP will damage her legitimacy from an older generation's point of view, because of course, the Troubles. Everyone remembers it, and as the previous caller said, and as Sinn Féin's leader has said, it arguably almost goes directly against the Good Friday Agreement.
I mean, Paul, tell me, you know, as a young Labour supporter, do you look at this Tory government and think they're from a different generation and just a sort of different time almost?
Yeah, of course. Especially Theresa May out of all of them, and especially going back to like fox hunting or whatever the stuff she said, and some of it just sounds archaic, you know, and you just have sort of no respect for them. And so what I think is, whenever the next general election is, whether it is this year or if it's down a year and 5 years, then, like I said to you, legitimacy has been damaged from my generation, and I think from the...
And then Jezza, of course. Jezza, of course, is off to Glastonbury, Paul, isn't he?
Yeah, sorry?
Jezza is off to Glastonbury.
Is he? Is he going to Glastonbury, is he?
Yeah. I mean, you know, the Labour leader is 68 years old, and he turns up on rock concerts and goes on stage. I mean...
That says it all, doesn't it?
Do you think he's cool, Paul?
I don't think he's a bit of a nerd, isn't he, really? But no, I mean, you got to hand it to him. He's an honest guy. Whether you or not I agree with all his principles, I mean, this manifesto we saw was probably the most left-wing manifesto that we've seen in a while, and he brought back, obviously, Clause 4 of the initial founding of the Labour Party. So, I mean, I'm not as far left as him.
No.
I appreciate that he's an honest man, and you're never going to like every single point of a manifesto, are you?
Well, and I wonder who is the Tory leader he would fear the most, you know? And it seems to me that a very weakened Theresa May, just about clinging on, having lost a lot of credibility, I think both internationally and at home, is probably what Jeremy Corbyn wants. Paul, I thank you for your call. Adrian in Blackheath. Is Mrs May the right leader? Does she have your confidence and support?
No, and no.
Right.
We've got a real problem here, haven't we? What's the choice? So in the last election, we saw two losers. One person who couldn't win against a man with more baggage than Tier 5, and another one who couldn't win against the worst election campaign I've ever seen, whose primary proposition was the other guy's an idiot, you've got no choice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we had the last election. So neither of them won, they both lost. So we've got two losers in the two main parties. We've got a situation now, if I was Scottish, I think the DUP has got more clout with 10 MPs than Scotland and Wales have combined.
Well, had the numbers worked differently, Adrian, it could have been the SNP with that power, couldn't it?
It could, but May's a busted flush. But what would you replace her with? Johnson is a man whose mouth is so large it seems to have left little room in his head for a brain. He comes up with felt bites, so he's got a political instinct. So he's got political instinct. May hasn't. May has intellect. He hasn't. So
hang on. I mean, Boris is extremely well read. He writes beautifully. I mean, he's a bright bloke,
No, there's a difference between having had lots and lots of education and actually being very bright and actually being able to solve problems and come up with good. What's a policy that Boris has ever come up with? Can you think of any real solid policy? What's he done in the Foreign Office in the time?
Not much.
Anything at all?
No, I agree. I agree with that. I agree with that. But I mean, Adrian, let's put it like this. Let's say, 6-8 weeks down the road, the government's been formed. They've got a confidence and supply arrangement with the DUP that's working. The Queen's Speech legislation has passed. Things are relatively stable. And then Theresa May announces before the summer recess that she's not really enjoying it very much and she's going to go. And the Tory party elect or anoint a new leader. Would the public at that moment feel diddled that they hadn't had the chance to have a say on who the Prime Minister was?
Well, they've been diddled once, so they might as well be diddled twice. The answer, of course, is yes.
Yeah.
But what's the choice coming up? And the only good thing one might hang on to is that behind the figurehead, behind May or whoever else comes up, there are some people with brains that can get us through this very, very, very difficult period. Perhaps the worst. I mean, it's a great shame, isn't it? We've got the worst two political party leaders in recent times at the time of the most difficult challenge the nation has ever had.
It's a very important time. Adrian, make me a prediction. Will May still be there at Christmas?
No.
Thank you very much indeed. And I get on text, be careful what you wish for. With all her faults, Theresa May is still the best of a lot, says T. And my last caller of the evening is going to be John in Croydon. Come on, Mrs. May, marks out of 10. Is she the right person?
No, she ain't the right person. And for every Conservative follower out there who keeps ringing up and saying that she's a strong leader, for one, she can't even have a debate with Jeremy Corbyn, so that shows weakness.
Mm-hmm.
2, she backtracks on nearly every policy she comes up with. And 3, she can't even give a straight answer in an interview. I mean, she collapsed in the Grenfell Tower interview. She couldn't give a straight answer. She kept repeating herself as if, read the script, Theresa, don't go off script. I mean, and to be honest, most politicians, including yourself, you're not very good at answering questions and getting straight to the point. When someone asks them a question, they want a straight answer. As a leader, you should have the balls to say what you're really thinking, and not be thinking, and not be coming out with what's going to please people. What's the right thing to say?
I know. What do people want to hear, as opposed to what do I really think? Well, John, I did my best as UKIP leader to answer questions, but I'll take that on the chin. So really, what you're saying is she's unsuitable. John, who do you think would make a better Prime Minister?
Oh, God knows. I mean, I like Jeremy Corbyn, but I don't like the Labour Party.
Yeah, well, it ain't going to be Corbyn. It's going to be somebody if she goes within the Tory ranks. John, I thank you. And John, just lining it out there, what the faults with May are, I find it tough to disagree with a lot of that. Well, my final thought on this is she's clearly not enjoying it. She's lost her authority. It's going to be very tough and pretty miserable for her to continue as Prime Minister. I think that, provided they get this government off the ground, there'll come a time over the course of this summer when there'll be great pressure upon her to go, but not to be seen, to be pushed, to be given the option of walking out on her own. I'd say it's 50-50 whether she's still here at Christmas. I really would.